Yo, this is the ancient Texan. I just did a little research on voter ID. I used the AIs to try to summarize the Republican and the Democratic viewpoint. Um, Republicans argue that Democrats just want um to pad the voter ballots, the records with unauthorized voters, illegal immigrants, so they can win. Um, it's a accusation, uh, like a lot of accusations, that if there's some truth in it, let's find it, put the Justice Department on it, uh, FBI investigate it, whatever, and let's prosecute those people that are doing illegal stuff. Um, and the Democrats are saying that voter ID is just going to hurt poor people, black people, Hispanics, because their records uh, may not be easy to get a birth certificate and to show, uh, the path that got them to the current name. And, you know, it's easy to say get an ID, and it's not so easy sometimes to do it. Well, I happen to live with a woman um, that's nearly 80, same as me, that has had 5 name changes. She's had 3 marriages, obviously 2 divorces, and she changed her name once just because she didn't like her first name. Um, so she's got a quite a paper trail that's been carried out, I think, in mostly 2 states over a 60-year period. And then, of course, her birth certificate is almost 80 years away. See, unlike me, a guy in our society pretty much keeps his name. Although with my second wife, I offered to, let's make a hyphenated name and we both take it. She didn't like that. She kept her own name, and uh, I kept my name, and the world went on. I'm not too much. I like some traditions, but that wasn't one that I was particularly fond of. Didn't much really care. But if you have someone like my wife that's had 5 name changes, and you can say everybody ought to keep all their important records, but we're humans over 80 years through a lot of different circumstances. That's just not realistic. And it's not, and actually, my wife is that organized. But I think the typical 80-year-old woman would not be that organized and have records for 80 years. Now, a Republican can argue they should, but most Republicans making that argument are white men that are in general, uh, congressmen or senators, whatever, and they have the resources. Plus, they don't even have the problem. So they're making rules about people that they're not in the same circumstance. Now, my own personal view is I have conceptually I don't have a problem with having voter ID, just like I don't have a problem with having a driver's license. Um, and if they said let's pass a law that you got to bring your driver's license or an ID uh, by somebody valid, I don't know who the hell would be considered a valid source for IDs, but let's say driver's license would be one of them. Perhaps go to the Social Security Administration and they could give you a card that's a little better researched than normal Social Security card and the flimsy paper thing. They can't seem to afford a plastic card. But I don't know. I accept that having a bona fide institution issue them is part of the problem. But on the other hand, I don't see putting that whole burden back on a 80-year-old person. I think that would lead to a lot of women, particularly women. I actually think this is more man woman because women change their name so often than a race issue or poverty issue or anything else. I think this is a clearly it'd be much harder for most women. So, what do I? And I listened to both arguments, and there's some valid. Both sides have a pretty decent argument. But what I see the problem really is on how to do it. How are we going to set up a system that's fair and that people that are wanting to follow the law can easily follow it, and or they can get the help um, to sort it out. And where my wife is capable now at 80, we're both still pre-senile, we're starting to forget stuff. What about when she's 85 or 90? Maybe she won't be quite as organized as she is now. You could have had me at 20 and I would not be as organized as she is. And if I have to keep paper records, I'm in bad shape. I can do pretty good keeping records online. But my online records didn't start till, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. So, maybe next lifetime, if I have online records starting from, time I'm zero, I can handle it. But I wouldn't have handled it. But I'm lucky because I only had one name my whole life. So, what the the question is how to do it more than either side actually disagreeing with the idea of ID. ID by itself is pretty neutral issue. And it would seem like we should be able to come to some way to do this. Um, and I think in general, it's better to have IDs than not have IDs. It's just how do we go from where we are to where we want to be without hurting a lot of people and disadvantaging those 80-year-old women who have a bunch of name changes and just don't have the time, energy, or resources to, you know, go back in time. Here's something I would propose, and I think it makes sense. I think, we all want instant gratification, so I seriously doubt if Republicans are going to like this, and probably Democrats won't like it either. But I'm going to throw it out there anyway. I would say that we set a date, like we're in 2026. Let's say starting January 2027, anybody that shows up to vote that's below the age of 30, which is negotiable, has to have a voter ID. And the next year, 2028, anybody that's under the age of 40 has to have a voter ID. And in 2029, anybody that's under the age of 50 must have a voter ID, etc. Until you get up to, 100 years old, and maybe we'll let the 100-year-olds not, if you make it 100, you don't even need an ID. But gradually transition from where we are today to where we want to be. And I think it's reasonable to expect voter IDs. I don't think a calloused and something that's not thought out and thoughtful and putting some people at a disadvantage to others is okay. And that's primarily the Democratic idea. But if you transition this over a 7, 8 year period where you gradually raise the age at which someone would have to have a voter ID, and of course that implies that when someone comes, uh, that they're not lying about their age. So, in some extent, I accept the fact that we've switched from knowing a person's name as being his ID. We've switched from knowing his age and whether he needs ID. But yeah, somebody can probably cheat that. But I think it would be a general movement that 99% of the people would make an effort to follow the law. And in a 7 or 8 year period, um, everybody would be transitioned over to having an ID. And I think that would give plenty of time um, for people, especially at the upper end of the age range, to transition over. Now, even there, I think there needs to be, a part two, that we make it clear where someone needs to go to get help. Social Security Administration, the back room at driver's license or wherever, but it clear that they have a location to go to get help that has to be available all over the country, especially if you get real old and you can't drive. So maybe you go to the same place you vote, and there's somebody there to help you, you know, 1 month before the next election. But a place to go to someone get help. And if they're in the process of trying to get help and it's a sincere effort as documented by the person they're asking help from who can't help them, they get a little, there's a provision in there that you get a, get out of jail card. You get a card that says this person is actively, working on their ID. Here's where they live. Here's, um, there's records on file that this is a work in progress and we're having trouble. But that card would essentially be uh, a secondary ID that said, here's a person that's trying, but they were born in uh, Timbuktu, Texas, and the ID, the birth controls were, burned down in a fire and so and so. There's some, legitimate story behind it. And I know people can come up with fraud and stuff, but at least you know that the person is in there and their story is being written down and documented, and there's a process in place to secure ID. They're not just showing up to vote, you know, just flew in from uh, South Africa and they want to vote in our elections to make sure the Democrats get in power. Whatever. But I'm being a little flippant here, but I think if you take something and roll it in over a time period, 7 or 8 years, I think it makes a lot of problems easier to work out and figure out over that time period. And you can get a lot of, groups helping to get the percentage of people that are going to have problem with this. I think is, it's not nothing, but it's manageable if you do it over a time period. And then two, have a secondary provision, um, that as long as it's a work in progress and everything's out on the table and transparent, um, they get to vote. Um, Maybe you can even have a challenge process. Maybe those people that have that secondary card are provisional. So if it's a close election, you can go back in and challenge the legitimacy of those people. That could be part three of the law, that in a close election where their vote actually matters, um, you have a challenge procedure. So that, I think, would cover most of the major issues. Somebody it doesn't cover, I don't know. Um, but you spell out a challenge process that's done on a one by one. Most of the time, it won't be done because the election won't matter by those handful of people. Plus, I think 99% of the time, it's going to be real obvious if someone uh, is legitimately a U.S. citizen or is not a citizen. Uh, the people that it's going to be an issue is going to be really small. Now, do I think the Republicans and Democrats are going to take this recommendation? Nope. I think both sides want to say how unreasonable the other side is. And I think it's like so many things. The two parties, they have to, you know, beat a dead horse to death no matter which side it's on. And they're not looking for compromise and they're not looking for a way to sort it out that would work most of the time. They're looking for some extreme idealized solution um, that doesn't exist. As an engineer, I look at everything as a trade off. And you do something that takes care of, a rule, a system that takes care of 99% of the cases without any problem. You get it started, and then maybe have a round two dealing with, after you have some experience, you deal with the 1% where the law is not quite cutting it. Anyway, that's my proposal, to phase it in over a 7 or 8 year period, um, and then have a secondary system in, especially for the early years, where someone could get a provisional voting card based on the fact that they have a documented effort of trying to get the records, uh, birth certificate, and a clear trail to their current name and ID. And then a system of challenging and protesting these voters in a close election. What would I think would happen? I would think almost never are you going to get down to step three. And we could just put this issue in the drawer and come back to it in about 10 years and then try to tweak it again, iterate toward perfection. And meanwhile, just get this issue into a working system, get it off the table so we can move on and talk about things that are really important to our country and that has consequences on where we're going to end up as a people and as a nation in the future. And this is not one of those issues. If we both sides would just make an effort here. This is the Ancient Texan. Hoping you have a good one. Namaste.